Hello, everyone. Today we're going to move on to a topic known as the Freedom Rides. And before doing that, I'm going to talk to you about two African American groups that were working to help desegregate the South and provide equal rights for African Americans. The first group we had back last week was a group called the NAACP, which was founded the whole way back in 1909. Now, two other groups that are also going to be formed to help promote equal rights for African Americans. The first group is known as SNCC. That's just kind of what people call it. It stands for Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. This is a mixed group of whites and blacks, mostly college aged. And what they do is throughout the South, there will be several times and several movements in which they're working to get blacks to register to vote. African Americans, male and female, can vote, but not many of them do because of the intimidation that occurs often with the Ku Klux Klan and members of the White Citizens Council, which is another group of whites who try to keep blacks from utilizing the rights that they have. So SNCC will be one of the groups that you'll see today in the Freedom Rides that take place throughout the South. Now, the other group is called CORE, and this was also from a handout last week on Friday, I believe. CORE stands for Congress of Racial Equality. Now, this group adopts the beliefs of Martin Luther King Jr., who also then adopts his beliefs from Gandhi in the idea of nonviolent protest. So they will be pivotal in doing things like sit-ins and the freedom rides that you'll see today. And this is another group that also is a mixed group of whites and blacks. So today what you're going to do is you're going to begin introducing yourselves to this event called the Freedom Rides, which take place from Washington, D.C. across the South until their final destination is going to be New Orleans, Louisiana. So what you're going to do right now is you're going to get two handouts. The first handout is a reading handout, which is called the Freedom Rides Movement, Place, and Region. And the second handout is a fill-in-the-blank timeline of the different cities that the Freedom Riders are going to travel through. So what you need to do, you need to read the handout, and as you read, you should be able to follow along with the timeline and fill in the blanks on the different cities that the Freedom Riders are going to travel through throughout the South. So that's part one. So read it, fill out the timeline. Now on the second, well, it'd be the third page for you, there is a map. And on the left side of the map, there are 8 destinations of where the Freedom Riders are traveling. What you need to do is look at the map attached to the reading and then look at your map and put the numbers of each place that the Freedom Riders are traveling. So number 1 is you would find where Washington, D.C. is, place of 1, and then you go down to the next one, Farmville, Virginia, place of 2, the whole way down till you get to number 8, which would be Jackson, Mississippi. Okay, so that's what you're going to do first. So read, answer the timeline or complete the timeline, and then fill out the map. Okay, so for right now, you can stop the video, and when you are done, the substitute should restart the video, and I will explain what's next. Okay, now, once everybody is done with the Freedom Rides, just kind of hold on to that for right now. We'll get to it, but for right now, we're going to move on to the next slide and talk about James Farmer. And on Tuesday, I showed you a letter from James Farmer that he wrote to President John F. Kennedy explaining what the plans were for the Freedom Rides. And just a couple notes about him. He is a co-founder of CORE, and he is the one who is going to be organizing this Freedom Ride across the South. So what we're going to do right now is I'm going to show you a video on the Freedom Rides. It's about 5 minutes long, so we will watch this, and then we will come back and continue with the Freedom Rides.
The Congress of Racial Equality, or CORE, spearheaded the movement's boldest initiative to date, the Freedom Rides, a descent into the Deep South by bus to test compliance with Supreme Court rulings barring segregated interstate travel. Corps founder James Farmer acknowledged the perilousness of the journey.
I think all of us were prepared for as much violence as could be thrown at us. We were prepared for the possibility of death.
On May 4, 1961, two buses departed Washington, D.C., carrying black and white volunteers into forbidden territory. These were the first Freedom Riders. In Atlanta, they parted for the journey through Alabama. When the first bus reached Anniston, it was attacked and firebombed. The Freedom Riders barely escaped alive. The second bus met a similar fate in Birmingham. The city's notorious public safety commissioner, Eugene Bull Connor, made good on his promise to allow Klansmen 15 minutes to do their dirty work.
And with me are part of a group calling themselves the Freedom Riders, an interracial group traveling through the Deep South to challenge some of the segregated bus facilities in this part of the country. Yesterday, they ran into trouble. They ran into violence. Today, they say they intend to keep up their pilgrimage. Mr. Peck, you obviously have been injured. You're wearing bandages. What happened to you?
I got beaten twice yesterday by hoodlums, once aboard the bus and once in the terminal in Birmingham.
The attacks left the Freedom Riders wounded, terrified, and trapped among those who had tried to kill them. In Washington, the reaction of President Kennedy and his brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy, was mixed. They feared for the Freedom Riders' safety, but worried that offering federal protection to the group would inflame the white South. "Tell them to call it off," the president demanded of an aide. "Stop them. Get your friends off those buses." But it was too late to turn back. SNCC leader Diane Nash recognized this as a watershed moment.
If they stop us with violence, the movement is dead. We are coming.
Nash sent SNCC volunteers to replace the Battle Weary Corps group in Birmingham. Learning of this, the president lost his composure. All hell is going to break loose. She's going to get those people killed. The situation fell to Bobby Kennedy. As head of the Justice Department, he was empowered to intervene if he suspected federal laws were being violated. He dispatched his assistant, John Siegenthaler, to Birmingham to rescue the Freedom Riders. On May 20th, Siegenthaler boarded a Birmingham to Montgomery Greyhound bus, along with the SNCC reinforcements. Their arrival in Montgomery was met by a mob of more than 1,000 screaming racists. Some Freedom Riders were able to flee, but others were overwhelmed by fists, iron pipes, axe handles, and baseball bats. John Lewis was beaten and bloodied. Siegenthaler himself was struck in the head with a pipe and kicked unconscious. With no other option, Attorney General Kennedy asserted federal authority by ordering 400 U.S. Marshals to Montgomery to restore order and escort the Freedom Riders to safety. Freedom Riders continued to probe the Deep South through the summer of 1961, inspiring arrests and violence, and forcing the Kennedys to confront the issue head-on. Bobby Kennedy began to see the civil rights debate in a new light, not as one issue among the thousands confronting the administration, but as the defining moral issue of the era. As a first step, he petitioned the Interstate Commerce Commission to adopt new regulations that would stiffen already existing federal laws, requiring all interstate transportation facilities to be integrated. But more importantly, the younger Kennedy's attitude influenced the president's evolving position on civil rights.
Okay, now we are going to tomorrow continue to talk about this. So for right now, I'm going to let it go for right now. We'll come back to the Freedom Rides tomorrow when I come back to class. Just to show you here quickly what the map that you were working on looks like. There's actually multiple Freedom Rides that take place. They all originate out of the north, or at least out of Washington, D.C., and you can see the different paths that they take, and they're all working towards the same goal of desegregating the bus terminals throughout the South, because as of this time, pretty much you were still allowed to have segregated bus terminals, train terminals, but what happens is in 1956, the Interstate Commerce Commission, they make interstate travel that must be desegregated. So in other words, you could travel from North Carolina to South Carolina on a white and black bus. But when you actually get into South Carolina, there's no laws as of now actually making South Carolina have an integrated bus terminal. So you may pull into Charleston, South Carolina, into the bus terminal, and and you get off the bus, and blacks would have to go to one part of the bus terminal, whites would have to go to the other part of the bus terminal. So their goal is to go through each of these southern states, pushing desegregation of public travel facilities, because the federal law only applies to interstate travel. It doesn't apply to actually interstate, like within the own state. Okay, so we're going to do more with this tomorrow. Now, kind of moving forward here, we're going to talk about one of the new methods that the African American youth groups are going to utilize. It's called the sit-in. And what it is exactly what it sounds like. You have African Americans, mostly young students, young college students. They would go into places that were segregated, and they would simply sit down in hopes of having the whites recognize that desegregation was wrong, and in the hope that they would eventually allow African Americans to become integrated within the restaurant or library or movie theater. And the sit-in becomes very popular because it is non-violent. Now, often it turns violent, not because African Americans turning violent, but because whites turning violent towards African Americans. And we're going to see a couple examples right now of sit-ins being used by African Americans. Now, so what you're going to do is you're going to go to your notebook, and in the notebook you're going to write the title as sit-ins. We're going to watch 2 short video clips that will mount to about 5 minutes. One is called Greensboro 4, the other one is called Nashville Movement. So for each video, you're going to describe the movement and the events that occurred in each city. In other words, you're going to write yourself a short summary on here's what's happening in Greensboro, here's what's happening in Nashville, and that'll be another one, another 2 topics that for Thursday we will look at, including the Freedom Ride. So I'm going to switch it over to the video, put over one side for Greensboro 4, one side for Nashville, and write yourself a summary of what takes place with each of these.
In the wake of the Montgomery victory, Martin Luther King brought together other black ministers and community leaders to form the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. With King as its president, the SCLC championed voter registration drives and supported bus boycotts in other parts of the South. At about the same time, President Eisenhower's Attorney General, Herbert Brownell Jr., drafted a proposal for new civil rights legislation. It was universally opposed by Southern legislators. Nevertheless, Senate Majority Leader Lyndon Johnson guided a diluted bill to final passage by a 60 to 15 vote, establishing the Civil Rights Act of 1957. The NAACP's Roy Wilkins dismissed it as a crumb from Congress. Even so, it was the first civil rights legislation since Reconstruction. The law provided new authority to the Justice Department to oversee elections and investigate officials who interfered with voter registration. It also created a new division within the Justice Department to prosecute prosecute civil rights violations. The legislation was a symbolic victory for King and other civil rights leaders, but not enough to silence their rising demand for full legal, economic, and social equality. In some cases, the most deafening statements were made without uttering a word. In 1960, in Greensboro, North Carolina, 4 freshman college students walked into a Woolworth's drugstore and sat down at a lunch counter reserved for whites. The Greensboro Four, as they became known, were refused service, but they remained seated in silent protest until the store closed. Their sit-in continued for weeks and ignited a wave of similar demonstrations. Within months, the movement reached every southern state and attracted more than 50,000 students.
They come in and they sit down, and we're not used to them sitting down beside us because I wasn't raised with them. I never have lived with them, and I'm not going to start now.
Demonstrators encountered humiliation, abuse, and police harassment.
Welcome in the store, all right?
But they held fast to their principles of passive resistance. During a sit-in staged in Nashville, Tennessee, silent protesters were chided with insults and attacked. They refused to fight back, but 81 demonstrators were arrested anyway on charges of disorderly conduct. John Lewis, who would rise to prominence with the movement, later recalled this life-changing moment.
It was really happening, what I'd imagined for so long, the drama of good and evil playing itself out on the stage of the living, breathing world. It felt holy and noble and good. That paddy wagon seemed like a chariot to me, a freedom vehicle carrying me across the threshold.
The arrests galvanized the Nashville student movement. Student leader Diane Nash led 3,000 protesters in the first major march of the civil rights movement. The aim? To challenge Mayor Ben West to take a stand on segregation.
And we needed him to say integrate the counters, or to tell Nashville to do what Nashville knows it should have done a long time ago, like about 95 years ago after the Civil War. So I asked the mayor, first of all, Mayor West, do you feel that it's wrong to discriminate against a person solely on the basis of his race or color?
Ultimately, the answer was yes. Within a month, Nashville became the first major city in the South to begin desegregating its public facilities. Building on the success of the sit-in movement, Nash and others formed a new organization to harness the energy of young people for the cause of civil rights, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC. Younger and more aggressive than the senior civil rights organizations, SNCC members became the shock troops of the revolution, willing to take the fight to the racist enemy in the most intolerant parts of the South. As a Mississippi farmer named Hartman Turnbull would observe,
Power seek the weak places, water seek the low places, but SNCC done seek the hard places, seemed like to me.
Okay, now, so for today, what you had were 3 events called the Freedom Rides, Greensboro 4, and Nashville Movement. We're going to do these 3 at the beginning of class on Thursday. For tomorrow, you have numbers 1 through 4 to complete on the Freedom Rides packet. Alright, so if you flip it over, it should be the second page at the top for the Freedom Rides. There are 5 questions. I'm only going to have you do numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4 based on what you know right now about the Freedom Rides and have them done for tomorrow. When we begin class tomorrow, we're going to be starting with 4 questions, and that is it. All right, I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you tomorrow.